Coming up on this Friday edition of Newsline at Noon, about 2.5 hours past the agreed hour, the two Koreas finally reconnect their Western military hotline that has been severed for 5 months. With the restored line, the two Koreas are inching closer to reopening their joint industrial zone. Following the arrest of leftist lawmaker Lee Seok-ki on sedition charges, the ruling Saenuri Party says it plans to submit an expulsion motion of Lee to the Parliamentary Ethics Committee. He will face questioning by the spy agency and prosecutors for 30 days. Plus, speaking on the opening day of the G20 Summit in Russia, President Park Geun-hye emphasizes the need for policy coordination among G20 nations to achieve shared growth. These stories and more on Newsline at Noon.
Where's the best place for bibimbap?
Les Jeux Olympiques d'hiver se dérouleront-ils à Pyeongchang?
هل أنتم حقاً سابع أكبر مصدر في العالم؟
この歌手は誰ですか？你好，最近哪部电视剧的人气最旺？
Korea is attracting interest from around the world. The more you know, the more you want to know. Dynamic Korea.
Thanks for joining us. You're watching Newsline at Noon. I'm Choi You-sun in Seoul.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Let's kick things off with another positive development in South-North relations. An inter-Korean military hotline near the West Sea was reconnected just over 1 hour ago.
The move comes 5 months after Pyongyang unilaterally severed the line and is expected to speed up the pace of reopening of the two Koreas' industrial zone. Our Han Da-eun reports.
The two Koreas have revived a military hotline near the West Sea on this Friday, taking a step closer to reopening the shuttered inter-Korean Gaeseong industrial complex. The revival comes a day after the South and North Korean sides of the Inter-Korean Joint Committee on the Gaeseong complex met to resolve communication issues surrounding the joint business zone. South Korea had strongly demanded the hotline be reconnected as one of the preconditions for resuming operations at Gaeseong, as it was the only 24-hour communication channel between the two Koreas that could guarantee the safety of the South Koreans working at Gaeseong.
The West Sea military hotline is necessary for entrance control at Gaeseong. It is also critical when dealing with unexpected emergency situations there.
The line was cut unilaterally by North Korea back in March in protest against the annual South Korea-U.S. joint military drill called Key Resolve. With the reconnection of the hotline, facility checks and other final preparations needed to reopen the complex are also expected to pick up pace. Officials say the complex will likely be up and running again soon, possibly before Korea's fall harvest holiday, Chuseok, later this month. The two Koreas will meet again next Tuesday for the second Inter-Korean Committee meeting, where they will discuss the additional steps they'll have to take before reopening the shuttered complex. Han Da-eun, Arirang News.
There is also a flurry of diplomacy to bring North Korea back to the six-party denuclearization talks that have been stalled almost 5 years now. A senior U.S. official is in Seoul for talks on the North's nuclear programs after the Chinese top nuclear envoy's recent visit to Pyongyang. Our Kim Hyun-bin reports.
U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs Daniel Russell will sit down with senior South Korean government officials Friday to discuss North Korean issues, including Pyongyang's nuclear weapons program and ways to get the North back to the denuclearization talks.
I appreciate the time that they're taking to sit down with me. We'll be able to talk about a range of bilateral issues, talk about North Korea, of course, talk about some of the regional issues, but also discuss some of the global issues.
Russell is in Seoul ahead of a visit by Washington's chief delegate for the six-party talks, Glenn Davies. Davies is scheduled to visit South Korea, China, and Japan next week. Meanwhile, China's special representative for Korean Peninsula's affairs, Wu Da-wei, recently visited Pyongyang raising hopes he convinced the North Korean leadership to make some concessions to get the six-party talks going again. The Chinese government recently called on all members of the six-party talks to attend a semi-governmental meeting on September 18th in Beijing. North Korea has agreed to take part, but the United States and South Korea have their reservations as talks on North Korea's denuclearization were excluded from the agenda.
What we can reveal right now is that talks are underway concerning North Korea's denuclearization, but nothing has been decided.
China hosted a similar semi-governmental seminar in September 2011, but no progress was made. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Now to the latest on the political scandal rocking the nation. For the first time under a constitutional government here in Korea, an incumbent lawmaker has been arrested for conspiring to overthrow the government. Our Yoo has more on the ongoing investigation of Representative Lee Seok-ki of the Unified Progressive Party.
Investigators have been grilling leftist lawmaker Lee Seok-ki at the headquarters of the National Intelligence Service since the early hours of Friday morning. The investigation is centered on the anti-state organization called the Revolutionary Organization, or RO, which reportedly consists of 130 members. NIS officials are attempting to find out when the RO was formed, its purpose, and its mission. Lee is accused of conspiring to stage a revolt with members of the RO, as well as plotting to disrupt South Korean systems, including key infrastructure such as communication lines and railways, in the event of a war with North Korea. Following the judge's decision to have Lee arrested Thursday, the spy agency has until September 14th to question him. Once the NIS finishes its questioning, Lee will be sent over to the prosecution, which will have to decide within 20 days whether to indict him. Lee pleaded his innocence at the warrant examination hearing earlier on Thursday, accusing the NIS of fabricating the allegations. Yoo-rian, Arirang News.
And staying with that story, the ruling Saenuri Party is expected to put forth an expulsion motion for Lee Seok-ki to the Parliamentary Ethics Committee on Friday. The opposition Democratic Party, however, is taking a more cautious stance, saying it goes against protocol for parties to move ahead with procedures to remove him before the judicial branch makes a final ruling. The expulsion motion requires at least two-thirds approval from the 300-member National Assembly. Korea has expanded its import ban on fisheries products from Japan to include all fisheries products from the radiation-hit Fukushima and 7 other prefectures nearby. The Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries made the announcement on Friday, following an emergency meeting prompted by public concern about radiation levels. The ban includes all marine products from the 8 prefectures in Japan, regardless of whether they are contaminated or not. In addition, the government has decided to strengthen testing for radioactive materials in fisheries imports by lowering the allowed amount of radiation to 100 becquerels per kilogram from the current 370. The government also says it will ask for additional radiation tests on other products from other regions of Japan, even when a minuscule amount of radiation is detected.
For your fill of Korean and international news. Join Choi You-sun and Mark Broom every weekday at lunchtime. Newsline at Noon.
Plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring bills.
President Park Geun-hye has called on G20 nations to coordinate their policies so that they can achieve growth together. The president was addressing world leaders on the first day of the G20 Summit in St. Petersburg, Russia on Thursday. Our presidential correspondent Oh Jin-ju, who is traveling with the president, sent us this report.
The first session of the G20 Leaders Summit on Thursday was about growth and the world economy. The issue of Washington's plan to scale back its quantitative easing program topped the agenda. In a speech, President Park emphasized the importance of policy coordination among the G20 countries for joint growth. She said if things get difficult for emerging economies, it will make things harder for developed countries as well, as economic conditions in one country can quickly affect another in the current economic climate. President Park called on developed nations to take a more cautious stance in putting an end to their stimulus measures, considering the negative impacts the move will have on emerging markets.
Although an exit strategy is aimed at normalizing the abnormal, she emphasized that developed countries should carefully think about how it will affect emerging nations.
Senior Presidential Secretary for Economic Affairs Cho Won-dong told reporters that President Park played a role as what he called a facilitator, trying to bridge the gap between developing and developed nations. President Park also stressed the need to set up a G20 strategy to restore financial stability and welcomed plans to tackle overseas tax avoidance and to develop a global system for tax information exchange, all of which will be included in this year's joint communique. Meanwhile, attention has been drawn as to whether President Park will separately hold talks with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe during the summit. Cheong-won confirmed that the two shortly met at a reception ahead of a working dinner in the evening. After wrapping up her G20 Summit schedule on Friday, President Park is scheduled to hold bilateral talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin, where she is expected to seek support for her North Korea policy, just as she did with U.S. President Barack Obama and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Oh Jun-ju, Arirang News, St. Petersburg.
With economists concerned about the efforts of the U.S. Fed's tapering of its massive bond buying program on the global economy, President Barack Obama has affirmed that the rollback will happen gradually. At the G20 Summit in Russia, President Obama reportedly said the U.S. will wind down the program gradually and within a reasonable limit. Experts predict the Fed will make the decision to wind down its stimulus program of $85 billion a month to $10 or $15 billion rather at its next meeting beginning September 17th. Meanwhile, American investment bank J.P. Morgan said Friday it expects foreign capital to continue to flow into Korea despite the Fed's potential stimulus rollback.
And staying with the G20 summit, world leaders are using the summit in St. Petersburg as an opportunity to talk one-on-one with their foreign counterparts on a wide range of issues. US President Obama met with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe Thursday and will meet with his French and Chinese counterparts on Friday. Kim Min-ji has the details.
U.S. President Barack Obama and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe were united as they expressed mounting concerns about North Korea's nuclear program Thursday. The two leaders met on the sidelines of the G20 Summit in St. Petersburg. Ahead of their bilateral meeting, Obama and Abe said they were planning to discuss a wide range of security issues, including denuclearization of the Korean peninsula and the importance of Pyongyang abiding by its international commitments. The two leaders stressed the importance of establishing a cooperative system for preventing further nuclear developments in North Korea. Obama added that the U.S.-Japan alliance is one of the cornerstones of peace and security around the world. The leaders also shared their views on the Syrian crisis, saying that the use of chemical weapons is a violation of international law that needs to be addressed. As for economic issues, the two nations agreed on the importance of completing negotiations on the multinational Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement before the end of the year. The U.S. president is expected to meet with his French and Chinese counterparts on Friday. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping also met Thursday to discuss both bilateral and international issues. Putin emphasized that the relationship between the countries has been developing progressively. Russia and China have long been on the same page on a range of international issues. Both oppose a military intervention in Syria, saying that any action taken without the approval of the UN would be illegal. And both have rejected a UN Security Council resolution against Syria. After their meeting, Russian gas company Gazprom and China's state-run energy firm signed an agreement that may help facilitate a major deal for the import of 38 billion cubic meters of Russian gas to China in 2018. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
To the latest now on the Syrian crisis. Intense international pressure is on Russia after Moscow was forced to deny U.S. allegations that it supplies chemical weapons to Syria. Russia is also coming under fire for blocking all UN Security Council efforts to punish the Assad regime for its use of chemical weapons. Connie Lee has more.
Is Russia supplying chemical weapons to Syria? U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel said yes, before his statements were clarified. A Kremlin official called the allegations rubbish.
These allegations, forgive me for saying this, are rubbish, just rubbish. They use it to provide people who don't know much on the matter with another idea.
Hagel had said on Wednesday that Russia supplied chemical weapons to the Syrian regime before the Pentagon backed off from the claim, saying that Hagel was referring to conventional weapons. Meanwhile, the British Prime Minister's office declared on Thursday that British scientists found traces of sarin gas on clothing and soil samples taken from the Damascus suburb that came under chemical weapons attack late last month. This came as the U.S. slammed Russia for holding the UN Security Council hostage in an effort to protect the Syrian regime.
Russia continues to hold the council hostage and shirk its international responsibilities.
The latest remarks seem to show that Washington will not seek UN approval before launching military action on Syria. Russia has used its veto power 3 times to block council resolutions punishing the Syrian regime. U.S. President Barack Obama, who is in Russia for the G20 Summit, is now urging international leaders to support his call for a limited military strike against Syria. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
A car bomb exploded in a convoy carrying Egypt's interior minister Thursday in what the country's state media called a cowardly assassination attempt. Security officials say the car blew up as Mohammed Ibrahim's convoy was driving from the minister's home in Cairo's Nasser city district. The minister was not hurt, but officials say at least 10 people were injured. Ibrahim told state television that his convoy was targeted by a large explosive device that was detonated by remote control. No one has claimed responsibility for the attack, but fingers are pointing at the Muslim Brotherhood as the interior minister headed a team to clear the sit-in protest of supporters of ousted President Mohamed Morsi. The Brotherhood, however, denounced the attack and says it had nothing to do with it. The European Central Bank froze its benchmark interest rate for the 5th straight month at 0.5% on Thursday, despite signs of recovery. The Eurozone emerged from recession, recording growth of 0.3% between April and June. Economic indicators forecast further recovery in the second half of this year due to rising service and factory output. ECB Chief Mario Draghi hinted back in July that interest rates will likely stay at current or lower levels for a, quote, extended period.
We look up at that little padlock in the HTTPS and think we're secure, but think again, as new documents obtained by former NSA contractor Edward Snowden show most common encryption protocols used to protect everything from email to financial transactions are useless against NSA surveillance. The Guardian, the New York Times and ProPublica report that the U.S. intelligence agency has used a variety of methods to snoop on citizens, including inserting so-called backdoors in popular tech products and services. The documents show the NSA can circumvent the encryption that protects global commerce and banking systems, emails, web searches, internet chats and phone calls. Meanwhile, Brazil wants an apology for the NSA stalking and is speeding up efforts to improve the security of its communications by purchasing new fiber optic cables and a satellite. One of the nation's biggest food trade fairs kicked off this past week in Cheonan City, south of Seoul. The 2013 International Wellbeing Food Expo focuses on the booming health food industry while promoting traditional Korean dishes that are both delicious and nutritious. Our Paulie gives us a taste.
This perfect balance of vegetables, meats, and teas is a meal fit for a king. The royal setting is part of a historical exhibition at the International Wellbeing Food Expo, which displays the favorite dishes of Korea's past kings. The celebrated King Sejong was partial to meat, while other monarchs of the Joseon dynasty enjoyed cold buckwheat noodles and radish soup. That's just a taste of the Global Food Expo that kicked off on August 30th in the city of Cheonan, under the theme Taste of Nature and Healthy Future.
Health and all things related to health are being presented through the exhibitions. By showing well-being food products, I believe this will be a significant event to showcase the nation's health food industry.
Visitors will also be able to enjoy delicious and healthy cuisines made by Korea's top chefs and many of the cooking experience shows. Organizers hope it will inspire a new generation of culinary artists.
Coming here, there's been so much to eat and experience. It's great. I feel like I want to become a chef too.
This year's expo features some 250 food companies from 28 countries, showcasing the latest food products and services to promote a healthy lifestyle or disease prevention.
As a person who makes well-being food products, I'm grateful that this venue was organized and available to me. I will try even harder to ensure more of these venues are successful.
Korea's food industry aims to expand its global reach with the event, while promoting the nation's unique cultural flavors and tastes. Paul Yi, Arirang News.
And time now to get a weather update with our weathercaster Lee Ji-hyun standing by. Good afternoon to you, Ji-hyun.
Hello, guys. Well, Chuseok is only 2 weeks ahead, so it's about a time a lot of Koreans travel to hometown for Balcho.
Yes, that's right. Chuseok is a couple of weeks away now. It's a major harvest festival here in Korea, one of my favorite holidays. We get some days off, of course. But Balcho, yes, I've heard about that. That's where Koreans go and they remove the weeds and just clean up their ancestors' burial site.
Right, because Koreans, we have a custom here in Korea where people go to their hometowns and pay respects to their ancestors, celebrating Chuseok. And I guess a lot of people will be traveling down to their hometowns, maybe even early as this weekend. So I hope the weather will be nice for them.
Well, Yoo-sun, thankfully there will be nice weather for those who are traveling this weekend. Now we'll get to the forecast for the weekend in a moment, but wasn't yesterday breezy enough to wear long sleeves even in the afternoon? It looks like today's weather pattern will be similar to yesterday's, with temperatures soaring into the mid-20s in most regions. And right now, as we can see, there are patches of clouds passing through our nations. The clouds will give way to a sunshine in the central region, whereas down south, the clouds will be sticking around all day long. So central region, we're expecting similar temperature as yesterday, but down south will be tad cooler. Now the weekend forecast calls for mostly to partly cloudy skies with daytime hovers in the mid to upper 20s. So if you're planning to go out of town or going to Balcho, the weather should be great, neither too hot nor too cold. And it's time to take a look at today's readings. Now Seoul will start it off at 19 and reach 25 degrees Celsius. That's 77 degrees in Fahrenheit. And Daegu and Gwangju and Busan will get up into the low 20s. Now I didn't put rain symbol for Daegu and Busan, but there's a chance of pop-up showers in those two regions. But don't worry, you won't need an umbrella. It's gonna be very spotty. Now let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like Jeju will also have some sudden showers in the afternoon, while Daejeon and Dokdo is expected to get up to 22 and 15. Now that's all for Korea, and here's the global forecast for viewers around the world. That's all I have for you this week. Enjoy your rest of the day and have a wonderful weekend. Now back to Mark and Yoo-sun in the studio.
Thank you very much, Jion, for the weather there. And those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Mark and I will be back next Monday for up-to-the-minute news coverage here on Newsline at Noon.